Welcome to your weekly dose of NFL Jibber Jabber, the Club Dub Football Podcast. Remember to follow on Twitter, Insta, and watch video shows each week on YouTube. Want to get in touch? That's easy. Message through social or email clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome back, everyone.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Thanks, Phil. So thrilled to be back.
Phil's got more sad as the weeks have gone on in the NFL.
I know we're now starting to fall into the, what do they call it in NFL terms? The grind. Is that where we are? We've got to grind out an off season that will have momentary highs with the upcoming combine and maybe the draft. But otherwise, we've got a long way to go to hit the end of August. Well, early September. But in a week where we've got half the news we wanted about international series games, we're going to park that. We're going to wait till we've got a full story and real actual fixtures to get excited about. And we're going to come to the topic that we've only promised we would cover for 3 weeks out of the last 4. So this one is a can that we have well and truly kicked down the road, but it feels the right time now there is virtually nothing else to do here to describe the new head coaches in situ with their new franchises and end by putting one of them somewhat ceremonially into Club Dub. So basically the plan is this, gents. I will give you a head coach. I will give you a bit of background, a little bit potentially about their coaching tree, and then you get to tell me whether this is the right move or the wrong move for the franchise. All sound like a plan?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Again, you want to calm that down, Phil. you want to build up to that kind of energy. Don't peak too soon. So we've got these coaching candidates to go through, and I'm going to start with the real headliner. And as you all know, the real headline was Kevin O'Connell. Well, a guy who's just found himself winning a Super Bowl ring as the offensive coordinator of the Rams, now goes to the Minnesota Vikings and becomes, considering Sean McVay is still one of the youngest head coaches in the league. Listen to the McVay tree. Obviously, Bengals coach Zach Taylor comes from the Sean McVay coaching tree, the Packers Matt LaFleur, and the Chargers Brandon Staley. So Kevin O'Connell, young guy, not a huge amount of experience as an offensive coordinator, as the fact we've just named others who've moved on to coaching positions suggests. Do we think Minnesota have made the right move going offensive and also moving on from a very dependable head coach in Mike Zimmer? Thoughts, please.
I don't hate it as a decision. I think you have to, with that unit, really, you probably have to go offensively just to maximize the strengths of that roster. I guess the counter argument to that is you could have gone defensive because they need a full defensive rebuild. But I think, yeah, with the talent that they've got on offense, it makes sense to go for a more offensive coach. I mean, it's interesting though, isn't it? In terms of when you talk about the McVay tree, a lot of those coaches are still young, still relatively even inexperienced, I guess, because a lot of them don't come from multiple years as coordinators. You know, I think it's interesting to see, but I guess Zach Taylor's got to a Super Bowl. You've got LaFleur, who's done pretty well with that Packers team. I know he's had his ups and downs with Rodgers, but ultimately, you know, he's got them playing good football. Maybe not brilliant at managing clock or situation always, but yeah, I think it's a pretty good move. It's interesting to see how it will play out.
You say about ages, so let me give you that breakdown. I've just given you that Sean McVay head coaching tree. So Zach Taylor, Matt LaFleur, Brandon Staley, all of them head coaches before they were 40. So the youngest head coach in the league each year seems to be whichever of the coordinators in the Rams organization is taken as a head coach. And it's the same here. So Kevin O'Connell, like you said, 2 years experience as an NFL coordinator, 36 years old the day he was hired. We'll talk about this as we move through, but so often organizations go for the opposite of, the coach that was in situ, replace with ultimately the opposite of what they had. Going offensive and going so young and so inexperienced may be a risk. But JB, what are your thoughts then? If it's a kind of thumbs up from Aldrin, where do you feel Kevin O'Connell sits amongst the picks?
I think it's the right decision for what the Vikings need to focus on, which is presumably moving forward with Kirk Cousins as their quarterback. So much like Sean McVay when he landed in Los Angeles, Kevin O'Connell is going to have to deal with a mediocre quarterback who isn't as good as some people think he is. Hashtag Kirk Cousins is a jobber. But you can understand why they want to go for someone in that kind of vein, in that kind of McVay vein, with explosive players like they've got in Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook especially. And I was about to say old, reliable and Adam Thielen. He's probably younger than all of us, but just feels like he's been on that Vikings team really longer than what maybe anybody except Kyle Rudolph on offense. So you're right. There are a lot of really good pieces there, and you've got to think that O'Connell, the expectation for O'Connell is that he'll come in and work some magic, sprinkle some McVay dust and really start to show what that is capable of in a division that's not necessarily going to be in flux. But I think we've talked about, I think Phil made points on this in a recent podcast. Just it's, the North is the Packers and that's it. Every year, really, aside, Mike Zimmer poured out some good seasons for the Vikings, but I think he had more downs than he had ups. So, yes, I agree with Aldrin's point that the defense is probably where they need a lot of attention because it had those Zimmer hallmarks of hanging on to people a little bit too long, a little bit longer than they needed because they understood the system. So I can't remember off the top of my head who they've gone for in defensive coordinator, but that guy has probably got a lot of work ahead of him. So the better O'Connell can do with the offense, the less pressure there's going to be on that.
And Phil, what are your thoughts? Round us out.
I think I don't think Zimmer was a bad coach there. I think he did a decent job, but they were kind of there or thereabouts, just missing the playoffs or, every year. So I think he'd gone as far as he probably could with them with that roster. I think, to be honest, if Dalvin Cook's healthy, I think they probably make the playoffs. If he's healthy for the whole season, I think they'd have made the playoffs last year. But ultimately, that's the kind of stuff that happens, isn't it? And people lose their jobs. So it was probably time for a fresh voice there. And O'Connell, has obviously done a great job at the Rams. They're obviously hoping that they kind of benefit of some of that, Sean McVay rub, I suppose, in terms of some of those fresh young ideas and see if they can kind of invigorate Kirk Cousins for a year. And if it doesn't work out, then, they've got a young coach to rebuild with potentially a new quarterback. So I think time will tell whether it's the right move or not. But I think, given their options, it's not a bad move.
So I'm kind of broadly with you all. I don't think Zimmer did an awful lot wrong. I just think, he'd never quite taken them, as you said, Phil, kind of over the hill. We had kind of the Minneapolis Miracle. They had some really good times, but, by the time you've decided you're going to make a change, particularly when it involves front office and head coach, going for something very different, giving yourself a chance for success feels the right thing. And also, for all of our criticism, young coaches all coming out of the Sean McVay tree, as you said at the start, Aldrin, none of them have really done bad jobs, have they? I mean, Brandon Staley looked like he'd kind of moved the Chargers forward at certain points, and as much as they still have a few fundamental flaws, I think they looked overall a better team than the year before in his first year, and the other two obviously have had really good years in Green Bay and in Cincinnati respectively. So probably broadly a thumbs up for our first head coach, maybe in the running to be our Club Dub nomination for the pick of the bunch. So let's move on to the next one. If we say that there's this kind of pattern that football clubs in the NFL typically pick the opposite of the outgoing head coach for their new coach, then the Chicago Bears must have picked an absolutely brilliant, entirely capable head coach to replace, the car crash of an experience that was years under Matt Nagy, right? So this is where we're going to throw over to Aldrin again, because you'll be the expert here about Matt Eberflus, formerly the defensive coordinator at your Indianapolis Colts. Do you think it weakens the Colts much? Is this a guy that was just benefiting from some talented personnel, or have the Bears gone one better here? Have they uncovered a really great defensive mind?
Yeah, I think he's good. I don't think he's sensational. I guess I found it a slightly odd situation that they went for Eberflus, not just because he's not, an experienced head coach. And I think it's the fact that they're pairing him with, a rookie GM. He's a rookie head coach. And also the fact that the biggest thing that they as a franchise need to do is build around Justin Fields. I think it maybe needed a more offensive mind. That certainly seems where the weakness has been for a number of years for the Bears, is maximizing potential on offense. I think they now go into the season. Justin Fields is the obvious starter. Allen Robinson is an impending free agent, I think. So that leaves them really thin at wide receiver. Montgomery at running back, I really like. But, you can't build a whole offense around one running back and just one spotty but showing potential quarterback. So as a coach, I like Eberflus. I think he did a good job for the Colts. I think he was fairly fortunate that he had some exceptional players in that unit. And I think he could have got more out of the pass rush, say, that we didn't really see. So I don't know. I like him as a coach, but I don't know if it's the right move for the Bears, just as where they're at as a franchise.
A weird one. I mean, I don't know as much as you would know about his. This guy's been the DC in Indianapolis for 4 years, a lot more experience as an NFL coach than others we'll talk about. But he supposedly not only the choice of the Bears, but was the front runner for the Jags job as well. So obviously somebody who interviewed quite well in front of, decision makers. But his first press conference in Chicago seemed a bit off. A lot of, kind of poetic phrases without really a clear message about what he was going to do. And that may be a bit unfair when, the guy's got, flash bulbs popping in his face and, the world's media at his door. But yeah, certainly, they've not gone for an experienced head coach. There were some out there. Right, JB, what are your thoughts on Chicago? I mean, could it have got much worse than where they were with Nagy? Or have they gone for an experience at just the wrong time?
Yes, it could have gone worse than where they were with Nagy, and there are at least one more team that we're going to talk about in terms of head coaching hires that are illustrations of that. You framed this by talking about the commonality of you have your outgoing head coach's expertise and you bring in your new head coach that completely differs from that. And I think Aldrin's right in terms of the fact that the key for the Chicago Bears, like we talked about with the Vikings, kind of like we're going to talk about with a lot of people, is solving the quarterback problem and making sure Justin Fields is best set up to deliver that kind of thing. And I get why the Bears would want to go defense, especially when you think of like what the tradition of the Chicago Bears is. Like I remember when you, Rob, were kind of helping me, talking me out of picking the Bengals and helping me pick an NFL team. And you kind of said, right, what are you more interested in, offense or defense? And when I said defense, you gave me a list of 5. These are the historic defense teams for you to go and watch highlights from. And the Bears fit into that. So you can see if maybe the idea of getting back to quote unquote Bears football bears that in mind. The other thing that I think is going to be key to it is, and again, kind of like I talked about with the Vikings, it's the support staff that Eberflus brings in to help out there. And the interesting thing that popped into mind when Aldrin was talking there was when the Ravens hired Brian Billick to be their new head coach. Billick came over from the Minnesota Vikings that had just set a record for most points scored in a season. They'd set numerous offensive records in his time there as kind of an offensive assistant and then offensive coordinator. He comes over to the Baltimore Ravens, and what happens? The Baltimore Ravens become one of the most fearsome and well-known defensive teams in the league. Was that what Billick was hired to do? No, probably not. Is that a benefit of everything? Great. So to me, a lot of this is going to be, who do they pair up? How does the organization pair up going forward with like rookie head coach and rookie GM, like Aldrin said?
So you don't think it's as much of a problem? You've got defensive-minded head coach with question marks around quarterback, and Billick is a nice kind of example of how those things can work well. I mean, I think Billick, as good a head coach actually as he proved to be, I think was helped by some real, I mean, you could argue generational talents in his time, but actually it's a fair comparison. Phil, what do you think about what's gone down in Chicago?
For me, it's the typical opposite move, isn't it? They had Nagy as an offensive coach and it didn't work out. So they've now gone for a defensive mind instead. And it's a, you know, is it a strange one? I don't know. It's hard to say, but to go with a potentially, or what you would think is a defensive coach when you've got arguably one of the top young kind of offensive quarterback talents in the league, it's going to be an interesting mesh. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Luke Getsy, I think, as the offensive coordinator. Now, obviously, he was the quarterbacks coach and the passing game coordinator in Green Bay. But how much of a success in an offense like that is down to him, and how much of it is down to a generational quarterback in Aaron Rodgers? So, you know, I suppose it's a lot of it is going to come down to whether Getsy can gel with Fields and Robinson and Montgomery and get that offense going. Or whether they're just going to turn into another one of those teams who have a great defense and then, you know, they just keep getting put back on the field because the offense can't put anything up. So I think a lot of Eberflus's success or failure will come down to his relationship with Getsy and how he does.
I like that comparison. I think you're right. There's a few coming up here where you think how much is the talent of the coach and how much is the talent that they were able to put on the field. And none more so probably if I transition into our next one. So next up, we've got the New York Giants, who hired Brian Daboll. 4 years offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, a guy with 21 years NFL coaching experience, despite the fact he's only 46 years old. But I mean, are we talking about a guy who's been helped by his head coach, Sean McDermott, or the fact that he had a brilliant young quarterback in Josh Allen? Or have the Giants finally made a good move after a number of really questionable head coaching hires over the last couple of years? Aldrin, where do you think this one goes?
I think it's a pretty good move, really. I mean, for the Giants, you know, as Giants go, seems like a sensible one. I guess Daniel Jones's skill set somewhat translates to Josh Allen in the sense that he's mobile. He can, you know, he's got a deep ball in him, albeit often wayward, but I guess you could have said that about Josh Allen 2 years ago. So, yeah, I think it's a good move. Obviously, Daboll has been quite widely touted for head coaching positions and I think was in quite high demand. So I do feel like it's a bit of a coup to get him. There certainly feels like something to get going there. My only concern, I guess, is on a roster where arguably, I mean, you're now going back 2 years before this was true, but, you know, you would have said a couple of years ago, Saquon Barkley was the most talented player on that roster. And arguably you could maybe still say that now. And I think that hasn't improved with age, let's say. But I guess one of the challenges that Daboll had at the Bills was that he didn't really get the running game going. You know, there was spells this year particularly where he almost abandoned the run entirely and just put everything on Josh Allen's shoulders, and that didn't always bear fruit. Now, I think if you do that in the Giants organization, then it definitely won't bear fruit because Daniel Jones hasn't got the playmaker ability of Josh Allen. But overall, I think it's a really good move for the Giants. I think he'll do really well there. If anyone can get anything out of Daniel Jones, then you would hope that it would be Dabble with his experience of bringing on Josh Allen. And yeah, I just think he seems like a good presence, I guess. So yeah, I think it's a good move.
So it's interesting one of my questions was, when you've got a guy who spent 4 years developing Josh Allen, does his hire suggest that they're moving on from Daniel Jones? I know we've talked a little bit about the fact there aren't many stellar quarterback prospects in the draft, but you think it's Jones' skill set that makes him a kind of good fit? I hadn't really thought of it that way round.
I don't know. I don't know. The weird thing with the Giants is I don't feel like they've got a lot of options for getting a better quarterback, ultimately.
True.
So I think if you're stuck with Daniel Jones for a year, which it may well be the case, at least you've got somebody that is either going to show you whether he can be the guy or he's definitely not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I suppose first-year head coach, he can probably, as long as they don't truly crash and burn, he has the ability to, review and look to year two maybe and think a little more long-term. I mean, JB, before I throw over to you and get your points, this is the first one on the list where we're not just talking head coach, a new front office staff, new GM. We're talking about a question mark at quarterback, which the last couple of coaching hires haven't. They're coming in to what feels a pretty settled quarterback room. Where do you see the Giants going?
I think that's an interesting way of you phrasing that question to me, Rob Rose, considering the conversation we had before the season last year, where you seemed fairly confident in the skills and abilities of one Daniel Jones of New York. I would keep this, I think, as short as I can, because I don't want to continually slate the Giants, but Aldrin summed it up well. Dabble needs to either do what he did with with Josh Allen and get Daniel Jones playing well, or they need to hurry up and agree that Daniel Jones is not the solution in New York and find a solution. But ultimately, should that even be the top priority? Is that the biggest problem that organization have got? They are an absolute train wreck, and Dabble is going to need at least 2 seasons to sort anything out. So let's hope, in 2 seasons' time, we're not talking about the latest new head coach of the Giants.
Well, I'm
I
with
love
Aldrin.
that JB said, I'm not going to slate the Giants, and then 3 seconds later, you
Slate the
train
Giants,
wreck.
It was avoiding slating the Giants for too long.
Do you know what? I think you make a fair point. This is the first team of the 3 where it feels like they've got a bit of work to do just to get over the hangover from the previous GM, doesn't it? They've got players who don't feel like key pieces moving forward on a lot of money. Yeah, I'm with you. Maybe this season is steady the ship before next season he gets to stamp a bit of authority and shape it into the kind of team that he's looking to create. PB, anything to add on the Giants of New York?
Yeah, I think hiring arguably not young in the sense of, McVay young and his tree, but, in terms of other head coaches, a relatively young head coach, I think it gives them time to build, doesn't it? So I guess what he'll probably do is dabble with Daniel Jones this season. And then if it doesn't work out, then they've got the option to go, reset and go again with another quarterback from next year. So
I really wanted you to do another pun there. I wanted you to, Brian.
Do you know how hard it was to try and think of one to fit Dabble in? Anyway, I think it feels like a good hire, this. I think if he can do for the Giants what he did for the offense in Buffalo as their coordinator, then I think it's a win-win situation for them. So interesting to see how it pans out. Obviously, the whole hiring process was called into question with all the the Flores lawsuit and all that kind of stuff. But actually, I think it probably will be a good fit for the Giants.
So, Phil, I'm going to stick with you, right? I'm coming back your way. Let's turn our running order on its head. And we were talking earlier about how much is it the coach and how much is it that they're fortunate to have a certain amount of talent to play with. And we talked about Green Bay, right? And we talked about the success that they've had. Well, the Green Bay OC is, of course, on his way to the Denver Broncos, and Nathaniel Hackett, after a couple of years of shouting the orders at Aaron Rodgers, now finds himself taking over a Broncos team. And again, we're going to come back to that trait. You move on from one head coach and you hire the absolute opposite. If Fangio was defensive and also quite mild, pretty much till the end, where he maybe did get a bit more animated, but quite a steadying influence. Nathaniel Hackett is a ball of energy. Is he the right choice in Denver?
I think there's a caveat with that one as well. If Hackett brings in Aaron Rodgers, if Denver trades for Aaron Rodgers, and I know it's unlikely, but if that happens, then absolutely he's the right choice for them. Because it makes them a threat instantly, I think. They've had bad quarterback play for years. But is he going to bring Aaron Rodgers? Probably unlikely, in which case it's such an unknown. I think anybody in an offense where, or a team where you've got superstar players that, a generation of talents that can go out and do what they want. They can call the plays themselves. It's hard to say. You look at Kansas City and Eric Bieniemy, and it's been the last 3 off seasons. Everybody thought he was going to get a head coaching gig. He interviewed, he didn't get a gig. Andy Reid calls the plays. Patrick Mahomes is a superstar talent. So is it hard to read Bieniemy in terms of his ability and what he would do as a head coach? And I think you've got those same question marks for Hackett as well. How much of it was him and his play calling, because it's not like Green Bay had amazing talent, outside of they've got Rodgers, Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams. And outside of that, it's not a great core of
they've only got world-class all pro running back,
outside of that, and they've had injuries as well. And it's not like, as soon as one of those guys gets injured that they're all over the shop. I mean, when Rodgers was out, Jordan Love, they went to Kansas City and got pummeled. But I don't know. There's a question mark on this one. It's hard to say. And it all depends on their personnel. If they can make some good additions in free agency, I think I think they've got a chance to do something. They're in a tough division. If they don't improve their quarterback play, I don't think it's going to pan out very well.
See, there are 2 quick points to make for me. One of them is that when I come to you first, after you've just made a pun on a head coach's name, and I come to you first with a head coach called Hackett in his first head coaching gig, I was expecting a pun. That for me feels like an open goal, right? That aside, do you know what? I think the Broncos are in a slightly better position than many because they do have a couple of talented players that actually last season they were able to get under contract. They are not a poorly run franchise in the way that you could argue maybe the Giants have been, and we're going to talk about the Jags. They feel like they've got a reasonable platform if it wasn't for the talent in the division around them. So, interesting times possibly ahead for Denver in my book. But Aldrin, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a good hire. I have more questions about the actual roster. I read something the other day on NFL.com that was kind of suggesting that the Denver gig was, good, that there was, lots of options on offense. I don't really see it. I mean, I think they've got a very good running back, or potentially 2 if they keep Gordon. I don't know about wide receiver. I feel like that receiver room has potential to be good, but is never on the field healthy for long enough for it to make any difference.
Yeah.
And quarterback, I think you've got a massive question mark because, like Phil said, just because Hackett's gone there, all this buzz has gone around Rodgers. Well, I mean, I can't see that happening. If he doesn't think that he can win a Super Bowl in Green Bay, well, I certainly don't think he's going to win a Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos in the next year or 2. So I think it just leaves the situation a bit murky. Maybe if they make a play for somebody like Watson, then it changes the dynamic entirely, and if that receiver room can stay healthy. So I think there's more questions about the roster than the hire. is ultimately my kind of position on it. I think it's a very good hire. Like you said, though, Rob, sometimes it's what players you can put on the field. And at the minute, I don't think they've got very good players that they can put on the field. But yeah, I think it's a good hire.
I'm a bit higher on their roster maybe than you are. I'm with you. There are too many players out last season with injury. But ultimately, they weren't far away either, were they? Yeah, but they weren't far away. You know, there were a couple of games out on winning the division in a very good division. So I don't think it's a Jags situation, I suppose, is all I'm saying about Denver.
I mean,
or a Giants situation.
I'm not suggesting that. But, I just think, players like Judy, great. He's got great potential for 3 games.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's
3 games out of 17 is not going to win them the division, is my point. I don't know, but yeah.
So, JB, I'm coming to you last. And how do you judge Judy? Forget it.
Oh, boy. I coming last, I think all I can really kind of point is, I think all of you have made really, really good points there. I think it is... At times, it felt last season like a very talent bereft organization, not getting an awful lot out of people when they really, really needed it. And there is going to be a rebuild, I think, in place in Denver, which is weird when Rob is correct, and they are a team that you do kind of feel did miss out on the playoffs just by a little bit. They weren't far off from it. The kind of thing I think I want to circle back really is the point that Phil made initially around this is kind of going to be the chance to judge Hackett on, for better or for worse, his own merits, not having an absolutely all-universe, unbelievable legend of the game quarterback, essentially making him look good and doing the hard bits when they need to be done. And what I always think of at times like this are previous quarterback in Denver, Peyton Manning. He did amazing things with that Denver Broncos team, and he quite highly rated the offensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos at that time, one A. Gase, who we then went to see go to Miami and then go to New York, and is now, I believe, out of a job because he was just terrible. And I'm not sitting here saying, oh, this is absolutely the blueprint. This is what's going to happen with Hackett. I don't want to say he's a fraud, but you can imagine there being sensational headlines of that kind of thing if the Broncos season doesn't go very well. But there is a little bit of that kind of once bitten, twice shy to this. It's now like, well, let's not go fully on the Nathaniel Hackett train until we can actually see what he's capable of doing with, again, whichever quarterback it is ends up in Denver. Is it going to be Teddy again? Is it going to be Drew Lock? Is it going to be enter name of draftee or Aaron Rodgers here?
It's got quite a bit of variance in that quarterback room. So lots to prove then. And I'm going to stick with you, JB, and I'm going to turn this only a little, because we're going to stick in the same division, a team who come off a great season. If the Broncos weren't far away, the Raiders were a real bona fide contender and only beaten by some of the very best, really, when you look at their season and the playoffs. Slightly different dynamic here, though. We were talking about young head coaches coming in and having to prove themselves in difficult circumstances. Well, a little more than 10 years ago, that young head coach who was having to prove himself was Josh McDaniels, coming into the Denver Broncos in 2009. It didn't work out for him then, but isn't it amazing how attaching yourself to Tom Brady and Bill Belichick for a few years can completely change your stock? So if there was a bit of a non-start with wasn't he going to the Indianapolis Colts a couple of years ago, he's now firmly in place at the Las Vegas Raiders. And what do you think about his chances?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see him commit to a head coaching job and actually follow through on it. Primarily, not a fan of Josh McDaniels. But again, kind of like Phil and I just talked about in terms of like Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers, there was a little bit of this is always going to be what can McDaniels do without Brady, because we saw what he did in Denver with Tebow. And that's not a great comparison there because like one of those guys is going in the Pro Football Hall of Fame unanimously and the other is Tim Tebow. I think the Raiders have got a good setup. You know, they performed outside of expectations last season, which we've talked about on this podcast numerous times, not just in terms of the standard expectations everyone had of the Raiders, but then with just everything that continued to snowball for them as the season went on. So McDaniel's coming in, you would envision him working with Derek Carr, who is very, I don't want to say he's very hit and miss. I think he's very hesitant. I think when the Raiders had success last season, it was when Carr just sort of trusted his instincts, didn't hold the ball too long, and just went with what was there and just assumed things were going to go right. And I think that's the kind of thing that you want to see him build up from there. But it's, again, another organization that made sweeping changes, you know, new head coach, new GM, still relatively new city, relatively new fan base to a degree with what they need to establish in Las Vegas. And you've kind of got to look and hope that if McDaniels has now made the jump after all of those seasons with Brady, that season with Cam Newton that Patriots fans probably don't want to talk about anymore, and then a season with Mac Jones where he was fine. Is this now a different Josh McDaniels from what we saw in Denver? He says it is. He says the Denver experience taught him everything he needed not to do. So it's interesting at the very least to see where it goes.
Particularly getting a second chance. We're going to talk about Doug Peterson in a minute, and not many well, you can see by how many coordinators have been hired, you know, first time as head coach, just how many times people truly get that second chance. PB, what do you think about Josh and what he can do in Vegas?
I think you've got to discount the whole, you know, Colts situation. That he decided he wanted to stay with the Patriots. Fair enough. Denver, it's hard to judge. They just traded away Jay Cutler, hadn't they? And I think it was just before the whole Tebow thing kicked off. You know, was he given a kind of fair roll of the dice there? I'm not sure. He's obviously had a big part to play in the Patriots dynasty. So I don't know. The Raiders have got a good offense. You know, they're a playoff team. With everything that went on there last year, they're in a good division. They're still a playoff team. I think he's a good offensive mind. I think if he can get, I'm not sure who's his defensive coordinator that he's taken. I can't remember off the top of my head, but if they've got the right defensive guy there, you know, he'll have that offense ticking. I think Carr is he makes bad decisions at times, and maybe he doesn't extend plays with his legs as much as maybe he could do to protect himself. But I think he's a good offensive talent, and I think, you know, McDaniels could have them ticking. So for me, I wish they'd given Bisaccia a kind of season at the helm, because I think, you know, the job he did there, taking it over in some pretty unusual circumstances, and with all the other drama that went on with the Raiders last year, I think he did a great job, and I think he had a team wanting to play for him. So I would have liked to see them stick with him, but I think it's a decent hire in McDaniels, and it'll be interesting to see what he learned from Denver and then what he learned going back to the Patriots that he can bring to the Raiders. But I can see them doing well.
Just step in to add that to answer Phil's question, the Las Vegas Raiders hired Patrick Graham, who was previously the defensive coordinator of the New York Giants.
Yeah, read that one. It doesn't necessarily read well. But equally a guy with probably quite high coaching stock, but yeah, not really the help of superstar players the way some of the coaches on our list have had. Aldrin rounders out then. I mean, try and put to one side all of the pain you might feel at the mention of Josh McDaniels and how he embarrassed your poor wayward franchise. Is he a good pick for Vegas?
No, he's a Wally.
There you go. People tune in for that level of insight.
If I actually do put my bias thinking he's a Wally aside, do I think he's a good hire? I'm not convinced. I'm always a bit dubious about former Patriots coordinators going on to other things. I don't think it always works out. I think Flores was the exception, but that's come crashing and burning back down. I think he'll be a good fit for somebody like Derek Carr's skill set because, I think, Tom Brady and what's his face, Mac Jones, fairly limited in terms of, none of them were going to run the ball and take off from a different standpoint in terms of athletic, adding an athletic running dynamic. So it was always going to be somebody that's going to be in the pocket and have to find those kind of smart plays, smart passes, be the leader of the offense from the QB position. And I think Derek Carr certainly showed that he can be that. He's certainly not shown that he can take himself or his team to a Tom Brady-esque type offense. So I think it'll be interesting to see. But I think in terms of the type of offense that McDaniels will want to run is maybe suited to Derek Carr. Maybe he can bring him out of that somewhat reserved shell that I think JB touched on a little bit, because he definitely has that in him where he'll throw things away and not take risks, when sometimes you want that Tom Brady idea of sometimes you need to sling it and you need to find that crucial pass and just be the guy that leads the team. So maybe he'll bring out a bit of that. But to sum up, I think he's a Wally. I don't think he deserves a head coach's job. I love it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's strong. I like your point of view. I also like in this podcast that we've talked about how, Hackett actually did pretty well in Green Bay when he only had the league's best quarterback, arguably the league's best running back and wide receiver. And now you've told me Josh McDaniels has worked with limited quarterbacks and had success. Only Tom Brady.
I meant from the standpoint that Tom Brady wasn't Lamar Jackson, and Daniels didn't have to come up with a creative playbook to get him running off the ball.
The only thing Tom Brady's limited in is the number of fingers he has left to put Super Bowl rings on. I mean, that's literally Tom Brady's limited. But no, I love it. Right, so let's now go. We say it takes an awful lot to get a second chance as a head coach after it all goes so horribly wrong. Well, this guy's got a second chance because not only is he a Super Bowl winner, he did it with Nick Foles. I mean, this guy could arguably walk on water. But PB, back to you kicking us off. What do you think about Doug Peterson, and is he the right man for the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah, I think so. I think for them, after everything that went on last year, the poor hire of Urban Meyer, I think people like a sexy appointment, don't they? And someone new and young and exciting and different. And actually, I think having someone with plenty of experience who has been to the Super Bowl, who won a Super Bowl ring with, arguably limited quarter bowl talent, I think it's a good hire for them. I think he's got a good opportunity to develop Trevor Lawrence and the running back room. What are you laughing at?
Quarter bowl. We love quarter bowl. Limited quarter bowl experience.
Limited quarter bowl talent.
I said quarterback talent.
I mean, you didn't, but I mean,
no, you definitely said quarter bowl.
Yeah, we let you
you've
off.
Not told your wife you've bought on eBay or Fanatics or something.
I'm gonna have to listen to that back. Yeah, he won the Super Bowl with limited quarterback talent. In terms of having Foles and obviously Wentz has turned out not. I know Wentz was great that season, but he's turned out not to be so great. So, I think.
What do you mean?
I think going back to someone who's only been out of the game a year and isn't one of those young, exciting minds is maybe a bit boring. But actually, I think it's the right call for them. I think bringing someone in with that experience, they just need a year or two of really grounding themselves and changing the culture and starting to get a winning culture going. Because if you look at their division, I think the Titans are probably far and away at the top of that division. Who knows what's going on with the Colts at quarterback and how good a team they're going to be. They've got the best running back, one of the best running backs in the league, so they're always going to be an exciting offense. But I think their success comes down to what they're going to do at quarterback. And then the Texans, I don't think they're miraculously going to turn around into a 9 or 10 win team. So for me, I think the Jags have an opportunity, to really start to make a move, and it just needs that right culture to change. And I think Pedersen is going to be a good hire for them.
He's really happy to be appointed, Angelo. JB, Here's the thing, right? The Jacksonville Jaguars, when they've made hires in recent years, and you said about Urban Meyer, Phil, absolutely rightly, they so often get ahead of themselves. You know, Cy Khan was talking about, we've never had a franchise quarterback really in the history of the Jaguars. We've never had, this coach that's got a long-term plan, something that can absolutely change the philosophy and the structure of an organization. And then so quickly they're left with egg on their face. If they stop thinking long term and spending time staring at beautiful sunsets, do they have an opportunity, as Phil suggested, to hit the ground running and turn this thing around quickly with Pedersen at head coach?
Well, just before we get into that, I do just want to all of you, I can see all of you now. Please raise your hand if any of you have been a Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP, you've made the Pro Bowl, or you've been the passer rating leader in the NFL. Okay, and all of you, I feel, should put a little bit more respect
we're
on
all
the
pretty
name.
good at Madden.
No, on the name of Nicholas Edward Foles, first of his name, conqueror of the Patriots and Super Bowl champion. To get back to talking about the Jags, I am 100% on board with this. This is one of my favorite hires. I want Duval County to teach me how to Dougie, and I'm looking forward to, hopefully, when we get to see them in London. I think this is brilliant for all of the reasons that Urban Meyer this time last year and every day and every hour and every week since was an absolute disaster of a choice. I think this is a really good one. I think Pedersen did great work with Foles. He did great work with Carson Wentz, because let's not forget, Wentz was in the MVP discussion for that season until he got injured. And this is a guy who, again, not wanting to pick on Aldrin and the Indianapolis Colts, but has had to watch just the absolute peaks and valleys of that guy's games every week. I think it's a smart decision. I think he's a stable pair of hands for the franchise and the organization. He's a guy that is going to come in and work to get the best out of Trevor Lawrence. And we have all discussed the fact that based on his college tape, if you're getting the best out of Trevor Lawrence, you're getting a damn good quarterback. And that's kind of what the Jags already need. Like Rob's pulled that quote from Saeed Khan there, and just said, they've never really had this kind of talent. Well, now you have a guy who is tailor-made to bring the best out of him and to really have an impact there. And let's start moving that Jacksonville Jaguars franchise forwards.
And lastly, Aldrin, do you think that all of this talk about Doug Pedersen bringing the best out of a young quarterback is actually just a smokescreen? Because, of course, that season when Wentz and Foles were so brilliant, well, it was surely down to the quarterback coach, right? It was surely down to one Frank Reich. And is Doug just in line for his second fall in as many appointments?
Yeah, definitely Frank Reich was the reason. But I do think, I agree with the boys on all their points, really. Pedersen's a safe pair of hands, a lot more stable and experienced. I feel like the last experiment didn't work out with Urban Meyer, purely because he just didn't seem to be accustomed to dealing with adult NFL players. I think he was used to ruling with an iron fist and, domineering over younger players in a certain way. He looked great on a night out, but apart from that, not so good. But yeah, I think Pedersen just brings a lot more stability, and I think that's exactly what the Jacksonville Jaguars need. I certainly feel like, to Phil's point, I'll be honest, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be fighting it out at the bottom of the division with the Texans. But I think that's to be expected. You can't turn that roster and that organization around in a short period of time. I think Khan has a history of sticking with coaches, maybe to his detriment sometimes. But apart from Urban Meyer, he's given coaches time. And I think Pedersen will absolutely need that. You've got to give Trevor Lawrence a bit of stability. We've seen it enough with people like Baker Mayfield, where you've chopped and changed coaches and it's had a real detrimental impact on the growth of what was a talented quarterback coming out of college. So I think they need to give Lawrence stability as much as the franchise, because ultimately he's the guy for the next 15, 20 years if you go by the durability of some quarterbacks in the league now. You know, he could be their quarterback for 20 years. So, yeah, I think he's a really good hire, and he'll bring the Jacksonville Jaguars that bit of stability that they need.
Nice. So Jacksonville, if we're picking which team, fan base, coach goes in Club Dub later, the Jaguars feel like they're in the running, maybe with the Broncos, maybe with the Vikings as well. But let's now jump to one of the weirdest, certainly outside looking in, and it's not just about who goes into this franchise, it's about who was on their way out, because I'm going to talk about Mike McDaniel, no S here, as the new head coach of the Miami Dolphins. So McDaniel, 1 year OC experience in San Francisco, but interestingly, an offensive coordinator under an incredibly offensive-focused head coach in Kyle Shanahan, a guy who designs pretty much the entire playbook, has huge amounts of control over play calling. So have Miami picked the right guy in picking a very young but also very junior offensive coordinator in McDaniel? JB, why don't you kick us off with this one?
I don't know. This is the one that I have the most, I don't want to say doubt over, maybe the most uncertainty over. And kind of for some of the reasons that you've talked about, like this is Mike McDaniel doesn't have a great amount to kind of show for it. Like one season as the OC for the Niners, who were a play away from knocking the Rams out and going on to potentially make the Super Bowl and be in that conversation for Super Bowl champion now. And if they'd done that, I think it would be an incredibly different conversation that we would be having now, because having that ring, having that title as Super Bowl champion does an awful lot for your career. Hello, Eli Manning. The Dolphins also are a really weird organization. At the time when they kind of parted ways with Flores, it was a bit unexpected. I couldn't quite wrap my head around why, and what's happened since then does kind of make you look at it and think, oh, that's why. But how much of that was from either side is obviously for debate in a forum that is not this one right now. But the Dolphins have got a lot going for them. They've got good players across each of their position groups on both sides of the ball, and they're not potentially as, I don't want to say hopeless, but potentially as lost in the wild as some of the other teams that we've talked about. And there's a lot to go in there. I think Flores did well with what he had. You've got to kind of look at it and think, well, for McDaniel to be successful, he's got to kind of equal at least what Flores did, because otherwise, why have you really made that change?
Well, they obviously had that. Did the Dolphins have, was it a 7-game win streak? I know they had a 7-game losing streak as well, didn't they? Or something utterly bizarre last season.
They lost 7 and then they won 7.
I mean, if you've won 7 games straight, there's got to be an argument to say that this could be quite an easy fix, right, for the right coach. So PB, is Mike McDaniel, head of the 7th best offense in the NFL last season, actually in a weird kind of tie-in, an offense that also vastly improved in the second half of the season, much like the Dolphins. Is he the right guy in your mind?
It's an odd one, isn't it? I think they should have kept Flores. I think he made progress with them this year, albeit, I mean, they did go on a 7-game win streak, but it was against teams predominantly with losing records, I think. So, there's an argument about whether it was a padded record or not, but I think Flores had done a good job there. So I don't know, new guy coming in. The Bills, I think, will win the division again. So how are they going to stack up? You think the Jets aren't going to be any, that much better. So how do the Dolphins and the Patriots stack up against each other? Mike McDaniel's clearly a smart guy, in terms of his analysis, his football mind. He's quite charismatic in press conferences as well. So I think he'll get on well with the media. They'll be on his side as well. But it's hard to know, really. Is he going to be one of those coordinators that when he transitions to the head coaching job, it just doesn't work out? And for his mind, he needs that kind of person sat above him to really make it all work. Or is he going to thrive and really turn turned that Dolphins team, pushed them over the hill into a playoff contender. So it's an interesting one to watch, and it's also going to be interesting to see how Tua plays in season 3. Can he get the best out of him and get him back to his kind of college performance, and really make him, a true kind of bona fide starting quarterback in the NFL, or is that not going to work out? There are so many coaches in history that I think have been tied to quarterback play, and I think this is going to be a big one of those as well. How Tua plays is going to, I think when we look at the end of the season, is going to have a big say in how successful we think this hire could be. But it's an interesting one, and I think it could go either way. He could do a really good job there and be one of those head coaches that is universally liked across the media and is successful, but it could be a toss-up.
He has that feel of absolute boom or absolute bust, doesn't he? Of all the teams in the NFL, the only one I think in my mind that could go 17-0 or 0-17 kind of weirdly feel like the Dolphins. Good point to pick up, Phil, on the Tua thing, because supposedly if the huge numbers of column inches in Florida are to be believed, all the beat writers seem to feel that was the key part of the interview process. How would they use Tua and so on, because there seems real commitment to him from the broader organization. But Aldrin, throwing to you last here, JB says, look, if the guy had won a Super Bowl with the 49ers, maybe I'd have thought of him more as a head coach. Is there an argument to say if the 49ers didn't make the playoffs in the way they did, he doesn't get considered at all? Is he kind of, a beneficiary of, Jimmy G's drive down the field in the final minutes of the regular season?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that. I do also, I'm kind of with you on your very initial point. How much is down to him? How much is that Kyle Shanahan playbook and organization and all of that kind of stuff that goes into the complexity of the 49ers offense? I certainly don't think that he'll be able to get away with anything half as complex as they run in San Francisco with Tua and the Dolphins. Yeah. They don't feel like, for all of Jimmy G's flaws, the guy is a really intelligent quarterback coming from having learned from an incredibly intelligent quarterback and has been able to orchestrate a very nuanced offense pretty well. I think, getting to the Super Bowl and getting to the playoffs, Jimmy G is not a quarterback to sniff at, really. But yeah, I certainly don't think they'll be able to run that with Tua, that type of complex offense. So, I'm with you on all the points. He could easily have fallen completely out of contention if they hadn't had those kind of big game-winning drives to make it into the playoffs. If that doesn't happen, I don't think anybody even takes a second look, because you just go, oh, well, it's Kyle Shanahan's offense, hasn't quite worked with Jimmy G, move on to Trey Lance next year. But, nobody even talks about him. So, yeah.
It's a fair old shout. So I'm thinking maybe not ending up in Club Dub, but best of luck to Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins. I mean, we talked about it's a very different situation, but we talked about how, the Raiders were able to create a real togetherness with everything that had gone on off the field. You do wonder with the news that's kind of spilling out, or the fallout really from last season in Miami, how much they will be dealing with off the field when the regular season starts in 6-7 months. I mean, that's a long time where the Dolphins could find themselves pretty firmly in the middle of the NFL news cycle. But I like your point about football IQ, clearly a bright guy, clearly coming from complex offenses. Is that going to be the right recipe for Miami? I think that's a fair point. So I'm looking at my notes here. We're down to 1, are we? I think we've moved through pretty much everything. We're all down to 2. So let's do the next one then. And this is probably my favorite, and I'll give you the reasons why in the setup. The Houston Texans probably went into last season really as the tire fire of the league. As much as I thought there were some reasonable things done in that organization, and probably a head coach at the end of last season who might have felt slightly aggrieved to be losing his job, I love the fact that the replacement ended up being an internal candidate. Lovie Smith, a man who's previously taken teams to Super Bowls, another great defensive mind, a guy who did really, really well, bringing together a pretty I don't know. You can't say they're a unit that was low on talent, but I think in the circumstances to improve that group as he did through the season just showed what a great coach he is. Clearly well thought of in that building. So Lovie Smith being a Houston Texan. Aldrin, I'm going to come back to you to go first. What do you think of what the Texans are doing, and does it allow them to nudge themselves off the NFL basement in the year ahead?
No, I think it sums up the Texans making another silly hire. As an organisation, garbage is the only word that comes to mind, really. I just think they're an absolute shambles. I think hiring Lovie Smith just says that all over. This is a time, a team that really has no real answer at quarterback, holes all over the roster. I don't know, a GM that doesn't seem to be orchestrating anything very well. I think there was a point maybe earlier in the season where there was a bit, just before the trade deadline, where there was some teams picking up interest in Deshaun Watson again for a certain price. And then Caserio got greedy and was like, okay, well, we'll have 3 first-round picks, and then everybody went away. I just feel like all of that snaps into an organization that just doesn't know where it's going and doesn't know where it's at. I don't know. Lovie Smith, I think we talked about coaches that get a second chance. I've not seen anything from him to suggest he deserves one. I don't think revolutionized the Texans in the role that he fulfilled. So, yeah, I think it feels exactly right for the Texans to make that hire and not get any of the interesting, exciting, talented coaches that they could have gone for, and they went for a bit safe and a bit ordinary. I don't know that it changes their fortunes at all, really.
I'm kind of 50-50. I think their season next season depends upon a quarterback. If you're able to grab a Jimmy G, and I'm not saying they're going to win the division, but I think immediately that ceiling increases. And also I did think they were pretty competitive when, ultimately they had their best quarterback on the field. I'm pleased for Lovie Smith. I see your point about the Texans more generally. PB, how do you see this one playing out with Houston?
For me, it's another one where I think they should have given the guy, previously in the job another chance. I think Cully did arguably better than anyone could have expected with the Texans. I know they were a poor team all year, but he won more games than probably 90% of experts or fans would think they would have won. So for me, I think they should have kept with him. And it almost seemed weird to get rid of him, but then just promote his defensive coordinator, because I don't think they were particularly good on defense. So
yeah, they were so good on defense and they lost loads of games. Great.
It's a bit of an odd one. And I mean, with Lovie Smith, he was 8 wins, 24 losses in his 2-year stint with the Bucs. And I know, the Bucs had no quarterback at the time, devoid of talent, not the right atmosphere in the room and all that kind of stuff. But,
bingo, that's where he's at in the Texans.
Well, there you go. So, is he suddenly magically gonna turn all that around? Maybe. For all we know, that the locker room is well behind him. They love Lovie Smith. They're going to play their hearts out for him, and they'll come out and be a great team. But yeah, for me, I think this is a bit of a miss for them. I think they could have gone in a different direction. Bought in one of these kind of young minds and really committed to a rebuild. But bringing in an older guy who was already in the building, yeah, I don't think it's the right call for me.
Wow, I am really the only one who is in any way feeling positive about it. I mean, can we just say Lovie Smith did make a Super Bowl with, I want to say, was it the Bears he made his Super Bowl with? And I mean, that's pretty good going. But I do appreciate the point. Certainly I agree with you on Cully. I don't think he did too bad a job at all. Right, JB, round us out on Lovie Smith before we end with what could be a real horror show ending.
He's not in the worst situation, which we will get to. He's not the worst candidate for the job that the Texans could have gotten. Like there are I think numerous people that they could have brought in instead of him. Like it's like Lovie Smith having a second chance is not in comparison to Jeff Fisher having another shot and coming back to be the head coach of the Texans now. So in the grand scheme of things, if we're trying to be as positive about this as we can, there are ways it could have gone worse. But again, like we've talked about with so many of the organizations that we've had to get coaches for here, the organization itself is just such a mess. You've got Nick Cesario, I think is how we pronounce it, who's the GM, but there's still a bit of debate as to how much Jack Easterby actually does and how much power he has over everything. So who's making the decisions on everything? Is it the GM? Is it Easterby? Is it Lovie Smith? Is he having some consultation? And it all just adds up to a team that is still like they played well. Like we've talked about this. They played really well for the previous head coach. You could see the games where the team were just like, look, we're not quitting. This isn't going the way we want it to, but we're not going to give up here. We're still going to carry on fighting. So it's a team with, if you can retain it, the right heart and the right culture, but you need to appeal to people. You need to be a destination that free agents want to come and play in. And is it that now? No. Is it going to be this time next year? Probably not, but on any given Sunday, anything can happen.
So it feels like a long road back then is basically where we all agree with the Texans. Let's end with, do you know what? Another guy that I feel very happy gets his second chance. Dennis Allen at the Saints being a head coach again after what was a dreadful situation for him at the then Oakland Raiders, where he basically took charge of a team that were really, really struggles at quarterback, struggles really in all three phases. Is he any better taking over the Saints now with a roster that have been perennial challengers for the last 2 decades, it feels like, but now feel like all those years of success might slowly be coming to an end? PB, is Dennis Allen a victim of poor timing, or is this an opportunity he can really do something exciting with?
No, I think it's for him poor timing. I think you would struggle to get a really good head coach to go there in that situation. I think they've got salary cap issues. They have a massive quarterback question. They're having to get rid of a lot of talent left last off season as well. They missed the playoffs. I just think it's not a great roster. I think they've kept a lot of their defensive parts in place. I don't think their offensive roster is very good. Albeit, you've got Alvin Kamara, and if Michael Thomas can come back healthy, then that's obviously a big boost for them. But yeah, it's going to be tough, I think. And I think hiring an assistant coach is just a way to kind of calm the waters and kind of ride through, this is what's probably going to be a turbulent year for them. Having said that, we don't know what's happening with the Buccaneers now with the Brady retirement, Ali Marpet retirement, a lot of big pieces potentially going in free agency. We don't know what the Panthers are going to be like. The Falcons weren't great last year. So, if you can keep a bit of consistency, who knows? They could be a playoff team. They could be a division winning team, so it may be, I guess it depends how much he wants to keep of the system they ran with Sean Payton. But I think it's not a great hire. I can't see the Saints doing much, but at the same time, if it all clicked, it could work out for them.
So I've no idea how that became about the Bucks, but I'm not surprised. I like that. I like that summation. It was nice you threw the Panthers in as well, just to kind of throw us off.
One comment talking about the whole. I took every team in the division.
You did. Right. I know I just said, the Texans could look very different if you put someone like Jimmy Garoppolo under center. JB, are the Saints in that mold? I mean, if they sort out their quarterback situation, is there enough there? Is there enough cap space for Allen to do something, or are you with Phil? Does this just feel like a poison chalice?
If they sort out the quarterback position, is the talent still there? Is a very difficult question to ask because we've got absolutely no idea what that team's going to be and what talent they're going to have left. I'm kind of with you. We've had conversations on NFL nights about how good a job Allen has done rehabilitating his image, almost like washing off the stain of that Oakland Raiders time and really giving you a look at somebody that you want to see. Oh yeah, I want to see what he goes and does as a head coach now. And his reward for doing all of that is going to be the 2022 New Orleans Saints. And when I was a wee lad, I remember watching The Adventures of the A-Team, where, you know, the episode would conclude with them going into a garage and making a tank out of an old car, some cardboard tubes and some sellotape. And Dennis Allen kind of feels like he needs to get on the phone with John Hannibal Smith and Templeton Peck and the boys and see if they can come and put a competitive football team together with what they're potentially going to have left, because gutted doesn't even, I think, describe what that team's going to look like.
If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, that's where Dennis Allen is, according to JB. What say you, Aldrin?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that Sean Payton left says it all. I think he knows that it's going to be a real challenging few years, and there's not a lot of hope or opportunity to improve the roster because there's no money. They're in a tough division. I know Phil mentioned the Bucks, and admittedly they are going to be terrible next year, and we're all going to enjoy that. But it's going to be really tough because the division is strong enough that they'll beat out the Saints with, what is going to be the bare bones of a roster. So, I just feel like there's too much going on in the organization for Dennis Allen to really have any kind of impact, because like you talked about right back at the beginning of this, sometimes it's just about the players you can put on the field. And I hate to say it, but I don't think the Saints will be able to afford to put enough good players on the field to make any kind of dent in getting towards the playoffs. And the players that they do still have under contract, like Michael Thomas, even though they've got him on a now cut deal, you still can't get him on the field. So that's their biggest problem, is that playmakers are going to be in short supply, and those that they do have can't stay healthy.
Yeah, who'd have thought Michael Thomas would be a question mark for a roster in this position a couple of years ago? You'd have thought you'd kind of, he'd be the kind of bell cow, wouldn't you? The reliable kind of guy to move the sticks. That is a real, I know injuries have played a part, but still a massive fall from grace from a guy who was probably widely regarded as probably one of the top 5 at the position. Sorry, JB, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I think there's an element that I kind of agree with in what Aldrin just said as well around Sean Payton and his kind of decision to move on. And drawing a sports comparison, as I very rarely do, it feels a little bit like when Sir Alex Ferguson left Manchester United. Kind of he retired because you got the feeling that he just looked at the team, looked at what was on the horizon and thought, you know what? Just don't have it in me for this anymore. And United just never really recovered from it. And it feels a little bit like that. Like Peyton has kind of looked at how the last season has gone without Drew Brees, looking at the state of the team after they admittedly did kind of go all in on paying for all of this for the last couple of seasons to try and get to a Super Bowl and not achieving anything because of it. And maybe you just thought, yeah, you know what, it's going to be somebody else's problem now. And unfortunately, Dennis Allen is going to be is it David Moyes who took over from Fergie, I think, of this. He's kind of going to be like, quite well respected, really well in his old job, and then horrendously tainted by what he tried to do afterwards.
I hope Dennis Allen does well, because I think, you said I've mentioned it a lot over the last couple of seasons. I do think he's done such a brilliant job with New Orleans. I just think he's been phenomenal in the way he's been so creative with that defense. And it's funny, Phil, I'm about to mention the Bucks. There's this whole thing about the Saints hoodoo over the Buccaneers in the regular season, all this stuff. But actually it's not. It's about the ability for great coaches to game plan in brilliant ways. I think Sean Payton probably comes out of this smelling of roses, and in a year he will be the most coveted prize when we're looking at teams that are looking for head coaches. I wonder if we'll have teams next season that are looking for a head coach because the owners want Sean Payton. I wonder if the Cowboys would make a change, or the Giants, or, one of these really big name franchises will make a change in the hope of getting Sean Payton. But yeah, I hope Dennis Allen's able to do well. As a little aside, just before we go to our club dub decision on who goes in, interesting that we've mentioned Eric Bieniemy as probably a guy who, we thought might have been a head coach before now, but probably will be a candidate again in 12 months. Interesting, he's only signed a 1-year extension with Kansas City, so maybe he immediately thinks that this is his final audition to be a head coach somewhere in a year's time. But anyway, we've gone around our virtual room many times. We've talked about the relative unknowns to the superstars like Lovie Smith in the head coaching, what would you call it, bracket that we've just described. Now what I want from each of you is a name. You can give me the head coach, you can give me the franchise, I don't mind. But who do you think has made the best hire and therefore gets their nominal nod and route into club dub? Aldrin, you go first. Who's made the best hire of all the teams going new at head coach this year?
I hate to say it, but I don't know the Jags. I think purely because it massively improves their outlook. On the flip side of that, there's no expectation. They're a basement team that might improve and move up the ranks with a steady hand at the tiller. So the Jags for me.
One vote for the Jags. PB, remember you can't pick the Buccaneers. They aren't amongst your available options. Doug Pedersen and the Jags is one. Who are you going for?
I'm going to go for Dougie P and the Jags as well.
2 for 2 Jacksonville. So unless me and JB agree elsewhere, and I'm kind of winging it a bit, I'm not sure I've got a final decision in mind. JB, who do you think? 2 for the Jags. Are you about to make it 3?
Yes. I think I was quite clear in that when we were going through the teams. I am 100% on the Dougie train.
God, shall I don't know. I feel like I still want to go for Lovie Smith or Dennis Allen. I'd love Dennis Allen to do well. I really think he's deserved his shot. And who's made the best hire? Do you know what? It doesn't matter. You guys have already put the Jags and Dougie P in. But I think if anyone else had taken Dennis Allen, I'd have said he was thoroughly deserving of his chance. So I'm going to give him the nod just about. But ladies and gentlemen, let's play the music for Dougie P, Said Khan, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, I think everyone in Listenerland will consider that an education, gentlemen, on what these teams have in store with their new head coaches now in situ. I suppose it's not long till we'll be talking combine, and then from combine, not long till we'll be talking about draft. But how about we get together in 7 days' time, think of something creative and wonderful to talk about, and keep this NFL train running right through the off-season?
Yeah, maybe we could talk about the Bucs. Be nice. Strange.
The Bucs.
I just like reel in, fill in.
You guys have mentioned them more than me one time for a relevant point.
One time. Philly, you honestly saying you've mentioned the Bucs once for a relevant point? I love it. In a podcast where we learned that the Green Bay Packers have coaches who've worked really well with a real lack of talent in the roster, and at a point where we learned that Josh McDaniels has done really well considering he had very limited quarterbacks to work with as the OC in New England. I think that just tells a tale. It's the kind of stuff you don't get anywhere else. It's gold standard podcasting, gentlemen. You should all be very proud. Thanks ever so much, listeners. We'll see you all in a week.
Cheers, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing. Woo!
Remember to subscribe
and be cool. Tell your friends.